Welcome to PPL Expert. My name is Tom and I'm presenting the Airlaw course. This course is designed to give you an in-depth understanding on the theory required to pass the CAA theory exam for this particular topic. Despite this, own self-study, commitment and discipline will be required. The course is displayed in a form of slideshow, which I'll be talking through. Please feel free to pause the recording at any point, either to take a break or write down some notes. So firstly, we're going to look at why air law is important to us. Why do we need to study air law, and why as pilots we need to be aware of it. So it covers keeping safe for us as pilots, rules of the air and also for the ground, any political intervention and any laws that are in place, standardization, so us and other pilots are all doing the same thing, same standard operating procedure, and we're thinking alike. And lastly, accountability. Well, a lot of these things are set out by law, so if we do something wrong, deviate from what has been stated as a matter of law, then we must be held accountable, especially as we have licenses that we are accountable for any actions that could occur, damage or harm to anyone else. So how does this affect me? Okay, so much of air law, whether it's within Britain or Europe, is legislation. That means it's set out by law. So if we do deviate from the rules, we can be prosecuted, and the CAA, the Civil Aviation Authority, who is the governing body, will prosecute repeat offenders who do break these laws. And they will carry out ramp checks to check that we have the right documents with us, the correct licenses with us, all those kind of things. So we'll be in the aircraft, they'll come up to the aircraft and check that we have all of that just before we go flying. Okay, these will be random checks, and so that's why it's important to always be within our within the laws of flying, and then we're not breaking anything. Okay. Currency, so flying skills do fade without practice. So as pilots, we're subjected to a certain amount of flying to keep our license valid. If we don't meet these requirements, then we have to do refresher training with an instructor. So again, we could be caught up by these if we ignore them, or if we decide to fly over this period and we get checked by the authorities, then this obviously could be we could be prosecutable for this. Okay. In every flight, there's a pilot in command who's responsible for the safety and the well-being of the passengers within an aircraft. Okay, and if anything was to happen, they are liable for any actions. Okay, the operator has a very little liability when private hiring. Okay, so it's even more important than to be on top of our game. We need to be making sure that we are complying with all the laws and regulations and not breaking anything. Okay, and lastly, enjoyment. So ultimately, if we're staying within the laws and legislations, that means we're enjoying our flying. That means we're not worrying about possibly breaking anything, and it's going to make it more enjoyable to us. Okay, the last thing we want is to get into trouble, which will ultimately not only cost us money or our license, but will take the enjoyment out of the flying itself. So we're going to have a look at something called the Chicago Convention. So back in the 1940s, aviation was starting to boom, and across a lot of the world, aviation was getting more and more prominent. Okay, so they realized that they need to do something about it to make sure that all the countries that were starting to fly and have aviation sort of industries, that they're all complying with the same sort of ideas. Okay, so we had to have a meeting to overcome all these barriers where people have different ideas, so we're all sort of operating on the same page. Okay. So that was they had a meeting in Chicago, 1944. This is known as the Chicago Convention, and the kind of things they talked about is what would happen if we overflew other countries, different navigation procedures, some rules of the air, and this was all discussed within this convention. So this convention, it's known as the Chicago Convention, but it's also known as the Convention of International Civil Aviation. Okay, and all these different states came together to comply and agree on different standard practices. Okay, so on the 7th of December 1944, 52 individual different states, so countries, signed this treaty to that we're going to operate our aviation sector in accordance with the rules and guidelines that we've set out. Okay, and by definition, its purpose was to understand the future development of International Civil Aviation Authority. So going forward into the future, and how that can greatly help to create and preserve friendship and understanding among the nations and peoples of the world. Yet its abuse can become a threat for general security. Okay, so like I said before, they're trying to come up with a standard practice and come up with agreements so every party is happy. Rules of the air, so overflying different countries, navigation procedures, all those kind of things, so that all the countries were happy to participate and let other countries participate as well in standard practices. So the document itself comprised of 96 separate articles, which made the foundation of modern international aviation. So even nowadays, these standard practices remain in place, and it forms what other countries, how we operate our industry and the rules of the air and things like that. Okay. So the United Nations established a special agency called the International Civil Aviation Organization, also known as ICAO. Okay, and we're going to have a look at that on the next slide. So this ICAO, formed by the United Nations, is a sort of a way of overseeing all the standards and the practices that have been implemented, and the ICAO will regulate them, implement them, and also monitor them as well. Okay, now they come up with these standards and recommendations. They have two separate words, so all authorities will look to ICAO to see how to operate, and when they define a standard, it's with the word shall, which means that they will comply with something, and there is no, they have no reason not to do so. So if they want to still be part of the treaty or ICAO, then they need to do these standards which are labelled or defined with the word shall. Okay. They also come up with recommended practices, which means it don't have to legally be done, but with the word should, so it's a highly recommended practice, and the ICAO would like to see this member state implement them. However, it's not imperative that they do so. Okay, so all these words, shall and should, you can see have a very specific meaning, and that will define how countries operate. Every country will be slightly different in their way of operating. So depending on how they interpret the words shall and should will differ between how they operate their aircraft or have different laws and legislations. So ICAO set the framework for all national authorities. So different countries have their own national aviation authority, but they all revert back to ICAO, which is that standard practices, okay, all around the world. And all the members must incorporate the standards into a law. So it's all these standards will be implemented by law itself. Okay, recommended practices can be deviated with notification. Okay, so if there is a reason that we don't want to, or a member state doesn't want to comply with the recommended practice, they can do so, but they must have a notification from ICAO and a reason why to do so. Okay, so we're going to look at something called freedoms of the air. And during the Chicago Convention, part of what they discussed was the flying of other countries or to and from other countries, right? And this is known as freedoms of the air. So what each country can do, where they can fly to and from without any limitations. Okay, this was discussed within the Chicago Convention. They're not actually rights, but they're kind of grants that all countries are allowed to do. Okay, and there's 5 different freedoms which we're going to have a look at next. Okay, and individual freedoms and there's the different parameters which are involved. Okay, so the first freedom was a right for an aircraft to fly from state A to overfly state B without landing. Okay, so the example I'll give for this one, if an aircraft was flying from the UK to Spain, it would more than likely have to fly over France. So with A being the UK and B being France, There was no the state A could legally fly over or had the freedom to fly over the state B without any issues whatsoever. Okay. The second freedom is the right for an aircraft from state A, so I'll use the example of the UK again, to land in state B for technical reasons only. Okay, so if we were taking off from the UK going to Spain and we had some technical issue, we were able to land in state B without prior permission for any kind of technical issue, emergency, or something like that. The third freedom is the right of an aircraft from state A to fly paying passengers from state A to state B. Okay, so we have the right to fly from one country to another. Okay, without any kind of penalties or anything like that. The fourth freedom is basically the reverse of the third. So the right of an aircraft to fly from an aircraft from state A. So if it's, for instance, a UK registered aircraft to fly from B back to state A. So that reverse of the third freedom. So we have the free right to fly to and from different countries without any penalties or conflict. The fifth freedom is the right of an aircraft to from state A. So imagine state A is the UK again, to take paying passengers from state B to state C. Okay, so even if we're a UK registered aircraft, we do have the freedom to fly from one country to another, which isn't the UK. Okay, and that's in that fifth freedom. We do have the legislation to do so. Okay, now we're going to look at something called cabotage. So cabotage is the transport of paying passengers by state A domestically within state B. Okay, so an example of this, and this legally can't happen, but if we were a UK airline and we flew to America, okay, let's say we flew to New York, and then instead of flying back to the UK again, we flew on from New York to Los Angeles. Okay, this would be known as cabotage because it's a domestic flight. Okay, it's not specified within the five freedoms, so if we want to carry this out, we must have special permission by that particular member state to do so. Okay, most places don't allow it, however, because they've got their own economy and their own airlines that can do such a service. So the example of this is the Fly USA America policy, which doesn't allow cabotage, so we wouldn't be able to do that. So now we're going to have a look at the UK structure and of our governing bodies. So all of our governing bodies start off at the top with ICAO, that international organisation, okay, and that covers all the member states worldwide. Okay, then it comes down to a European scale for the European Aviation Safety Agency, and then in the UK, we have the Civil Aviation Authority, which reports to the European Aviation Agency. At the time of recording, we are still part of the EASA. However, with political changes going on, such as Brexit, it's likely that the UK Civil Aviation Authority will no longer be part of EASA, and we will report straight to ICAO. Okay, we'll be our own separate governing body. On the other side of the Civil Aviation Authority, we're also governed by the Department of Transport within the UK. Okay, so we have regulations from EASA and ICAO, and we must comply with them. And we also have some regulations UK specific from the Department of Transport, who also give us guidelines if and when they need to. Okay, so we need to follow their guidelines, recommendations, and the rules of the air they set out. And if we do so, then we can ensure that we're operating in the safe and the safest manner possible. Okay, so in the UK, all structure and regulations is decided by the EASA. Okay, so it's above the UK Civil Aviation Authority. The EASA set out these guidelines, and that's part of the rule that we are part of EASA. So if we're part of EASA, we must follow their regulations and legislations. Okay. The UK CAA is an